Hello everybody and welcome to this presentation, Teaching for Transfer and Overview. My name is Eric Carball and I teach in the Department of Middle Secondary Math Education at James Madison University, and I've been doing some work along with my colleague Christina Dubé for VASCD and other places around the state as we look to engage students in more authentic learning experiences. And so this presentation is really going to be about what it means to be able to teach for transfer. My contact information is there. You can certainly shoot me an email if you have questions about this. In addition, we will be presenting twice in October about number one, designing performance assessments, and number two, designing rubrics for those performance assessments, those performance tasks. So if you're interested in any information about those two sessions, dates and times and locations, you can go to VASCD's website and there'll be some information up there about those. So to start things off, what is understanding? And what I'd like to say is that the transfer of learning is a manifestation of deep understanding, that through these deep levels of understanding, students can use their learning in a new or unique way. And so here are some examples of situations where students deeply understand something. So they can do these things if they understand something. And so you can see that these require adaptation, that they're not something that's simply retelling something, but rather doing so in their own words. So it's not just spitting back information, but rather doing it in a way that's different. And so this is in contrast to what students do when they don't understand something. And so what I'd like to do is I'm going to leave this here for a second and give you a chance to pause your presentation. And as you pause, I'd like you to look at the differences between these two and see just what jumps out at you in terms of what it actually means to understand something deeply and what that means for what students can actually, how students can use their learning in kind of new or unique ways. So go ahead and hit pause here and spend some time thinking about the differences between these. Okay, so just to kind of clarify and move forward with this idea of transfer. So when one does express deep levels of understandings, these are some things that they can do. So can they apply a problem-solving strategy to a unique situation, regardless of that situation? So they might learn a particular problem-solving strategy. And what does that look like across different situations, and can they do that? Can they write for an intended audience regardless of the audience? So students might learn that, okay, here's what it means to write for a particular purpose or intent, but how does that look differently when those intents and purposes change? And then can students design experiments to test a variety of hypotheses? So it's not just about go through this sort of cookie cutter experiment and test it, but rather what do you know about testing something, and what do you know about the scientific method, and how can you apply that to other situations? And really, we can't transfer our learning if we're only familiar with content. So we have to acquire and come to deeply understand content before we can actually transfer our learning. So transfer outcomes are long-term in nature. They focus on individualized and contextualized performance. And what that means is that it's sort of a unique situation. When we think about transfer of learning, it should be autonomous. Certainly parts of performance tests can be designed for students to do brainstorming and initial planning in groups, but the true transfer needs to happen individually. And then help students help establish purpose and relevance by helping sort of students answering like, why am I learning this and what can I do with this? So it's really helping students connect the dots and make meaning. And through that connecting the dots and making meaning, we're setting them up to be able to transfer their learning. So some sample transfer goals, and I'm not going to read all these to you, but if you're in one of these content areas, you can hit pause here. And then I've got English language arts and then world languages on the next slide. So if you're one of these content areas, if you're math, science, or social studies, go ahead and hit pause here. And if you're English language arts, then hold on one second. I will flip the slide, and then you can hit pause on the next page. So here are the ELA and then world languages, and I only have one world language transfer goal there, but you could also steal from English language arts because a lot of those transfer goals are going to be very similar. So if you're English language arts or world language, hit pause here. Otherwise, we will move on forward. So those transfer goals are a result of this back and forth between acquiring information, connecting the dots, and then using it to transfer their learning. And so these authentic situations we put students in, these tasks that we design for them, are really designed so that they can show this authentic transfer of learning. So those goals that were on the previous slides, you saw a lot of like higher level blooms. So things like evaluate, create, design, depict, apply, things that really put students, that have them put wheels on their learning. And so that's what we're really aiming for with transfer goals. Is it's not about repeating or reciting or doing things practicing over and over again, but rather using it in a way that's different. And so whereas they might practice to prepare for a transfer task, that transfer task is using that practice in a way that's different or unique. And so we have these different learning experiences that students have. And if we really think about designing a balance here, we want to make students acquire information, connect the dots, and transfer. It comes from research knowing that this deep level of understanding aids in supporting memory. And so if students have some conceptual understanding, or they can sort of think about the content they're learning in a deeper way, that aids in acquiring new information. But the flip side of that is, as we acquire new information, we get to deeper levels of understanding. And so we want our learning experiences to kind of work back and forth between these conceptual transfer goals, but also making sure that students are given opportunities to acquire information. And so again, they can't just be familiar with stuff. They have to be able to connect the dots and really deeply understand this. And then part of this is really making sure that students get feedback and that we're checking for understanding. Our role, in a second, what you're going to see is that our role as a teacher changes very much when we are putting students in situations to transfer. And so we want to make sure that we are, as that role of coach, that we're setting students up in a situation where they can get feedback on the processes, on the products that they're putting together as they're transferring their learning. So I wanted to give you another opportunity to pause right here and consider learning strategies that you use that fall into the following categories. So with acquisition, basically it's practice, it's learning discrete pieces of information, so lower level skills, and then a lot of like any facts or formulas or things like that students might need to memorize. And so think about learning strategies that you use for students to acquire information, learning strategies that you use to help students make connections using these facts and skills. And so how do we put students in situations where they're making meaning, where they're kind of coming to deeper levels of understanding about what they've acquired? And then thinking for the last piece about transfer, and this is where they're adapting their knowledge, skills, and understanding. So the meaning making, the knowledge and skills they've learned, they're adapting them to specific realistic situations, specific contexts that are different than the context in which in the classroom they've learned this. So I wanted to give you a chance to hit pause here and think about some different strategies that you use that might fall into these categories, and that'll help us tie into looking at specific transfer strategies coming up. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the teachers and students' role are different when we think about transfer of learning. So the teacher's role is to function like a coach. So if we think about coaches on game days, while the game is being played, they're not out there on the field walking through slowly to step by step in the hopes that we've put students in a position to be successful on that field or in that performance. And so we want to establish clear performance. So here's what it looks like. Here's what the best performance that you might have looks like. So that includes giving them models and rubrics. It's also giving them feedback. And so saying, hey, here's where you are in relationship to these goals, to these models that we have, and here's some steps you need to take to close that gap. What worked, what didn't, and why, and making sure that students aren't allowed to be autonomous in the sense that we've really set them up for success without first making sure that we've prepared them for that. So not saying, okay, take all this stuff and go, without checking and seeing that kids are really in a place to be able to use their learning in a way that's new or unique. And so also the students' learner's role kind of changes with this too, because they're being asked to apply and adapt in a new situation, using these strategies, using the skills that they've acquired, using the deep levels of understanding that they've made. We're asking them to really kind of to put into action those skills and the knowledge that they've acquired. And so we want to make sure that these situations are new or unique. Again, it's not just about repetition, but it's about having students kind of, as we said, put wheels on their learning and use that in a new or unique way. So here are just some different ways that students might transfer. And so a problem or solution, can students identify a problem and think about possible solutions for that problem? Can they develop their own questions or be given questions by us and be able to pursue that question? So this might be that kind of authentic bits of research that students do. Critique or self-analyze, so students can evaluate their performance or someone else's performance based on established criteria. That's certainly transferring their learning as well. Creating a performance or a product, and so using visual, multimedia, sound, writing, speech, that they're putting everything together kind of in a way that they can show what they've learned through some performance or product. Given them for modeling or simulation, create representations to illustrate or predict outcomes to deepen understanding. And then a persuasive statement. Can they develop an argument articulating supporting information? and thinking about using persuasive techniques. And so not only can you articulate this is my stance on something, but then being able to say why this is your stance and supporting that with information. And so what you're going to see here, again, deeper levels of skills, deeper levels of understanding that students are reaching here. So I have two strategies for you, rafts and inquiry. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of each of these, and then we'll tie everything together here at the end. You might be familiar with both of these strategies. So the first one is rafts, and RAFT stands for role, audience, format, and topic. And so what students, it's really an opportunity for students to think critically and to think about a topic from a different perspective. And so in doing that, they're in a situation that's different. It's uncharted from what we've had them learn before, and you're going to see in these examples before that that's kind of how this works. So they're going to assume a particular role and consider an audience. And so who is their audience that they're either speaking to, writing to, performing to, whatever it might be. And that's going to be done in a particular format, and it's going to be based on a topic that students are going to choose. And so there's also some ownership or choice that students get when completing a raft. And so here's what the template looks like. And so in a second, what you're going to see is these rows going across here. These are all going to be filled in with just options for students. And so students would actually select an entire row. So they're going to take on this role, speak to an audience in a particular format and about this topic. So here are just a couple of examples of this. And so, for example, students might be, they're going to be a raindrop. So what you'll see with rafts is that oftentimes students take on the persona or the role of an inanimate object, and that's okay too, because again, we're stretching students. We're asking them to think, like, if you were this object or if you were treated this way, how would that make you feel? And so in this instance, it's a raindrop, future droplets, and an advice column, the beauty of cycles. And so again, we're really getting at is the water cycle here and how that transpires. So students would have learned about components of the water cycle, but now we're saying, hey, you're not just going to list these, you're going to think about them in a way that's different, because you're actually going to have to transfer your learning in new and use it in a new or unique way. Students would take on the role of lung to the owner of the lung and an owner's guide to maximize product life. So if you're a lung, what are some best ways to take care of you so you'll be strong and really in good shape the rest of your life? Fractions to whole numbers in a petition to be considered part of the family. So again, what's the connection here between fraction and whole numbers? Why would they be a family? What's going on there? And so students learn bits of information about, they learn how to solve a fraction, they understand what whole numbers are, but when we put that together, that's evidence of transfer. So I've got a couple more slides here on the next page to just give you some examples of these. But really, again, the goal is that we're putting students in these roles. They're writing or speaking to a particular audience, an authentic audience, in a format that's different and varied and based on particular topics. And so here's another set of examples, and I'll just leave this here. You can pause, and then I'll move forward. And then just a last set of examples here for you to think about kind of situations to put students in. So you can pause here if you want to check these out. Okay, the second transfer strategy is inquiry, and I've got examples here for math, science, social studies, and foreign languages. And so just to make sure we're not wasting any time here, you can sort of pause and look at these, but essentially what all these involve is starting with a big idea question and saying, okay, this is a really kind of esoteric, big idea question. And so I'm asking you this question, but then I've got some steps involved here. We're really investigating and thinking about this question in a line of inquiry that's involved there. And so for this math example, again, we start off with how do patterns aid in problem solving? All right, think about 3 different types of problems that they believe patterns help them solve, create and solve problems from each of these type, and then predict how they're going to help you solve problems in the future. So in math and other subjects as well as life. And so it's all about this inquiry question, and they're not just thinking about, hey, solve some math problems, but rather how does this relate to kind of what you've done currently, and how can it relate to something you're going to do in the future? And so I'll give you a chance to just pause on each of these coming up. We've got a science example here. So you can pause if you want to check this one out. Got a primary source inquiry, and this can be for social studies or English language arts, thinking about how perspective shapes reality. So you can pause here if this is something you're interested in. And then this last one here is a foreign language example about language inquiry or Latin inquiry and the impacts in the English language. So pause here if this is something that's interesting to you. Okay, well, that's all we have for today. I really appreciate your time. Again, my name is Eric Karba. If you go back to the beginning of the presentation, you can see my email. I hope to see you soon.